Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you for that. So, as it says on the screen, what I wanted to do today is try and just give everyone a little bit of an insight into how you could potentially buy your first property. So, hands up if you're planning on living with your parents for the rest of your life. Just the one? That's not too bad, just the one. And hands up if one day you'd like to own your own property. About half the room. Not sure what's going to happen to the other half, but maybe we'll find on as the talk goes on. So that's my goal today, is to try and help the people that do want to buy their own property one day have a little bit more of an inside information into exactly how that works. So the first thing I thought I would do, just to make sure you haven't got someone standing up here talking absolute nonsense, is give you a little bit of an idea on exactly who is this guy. So I started 20 years ago in property as an estate agent. I've been a property investor for about 10 years myself, buying properties. Some are rented out, some are turned around and moved on. I've got a TikTok channel, if anyone's on TikTok, Avocado Ian, where I give loads of helpful tips to first-time buyers and people looking to buy. I'm also the host of a podcast for landlords where we educate people. Someone's laughing because I said TikTok channel. Is that not what it's called? TikTok, I've got a TikTok, whatever you want to call it. YouTube as well, you can find us on YouTube, Facebook or Instagram, so we're all over social media. So the first thing that I wanted to ask someone in the audience is, what do you think is the average price of the UK property at the moment? What is the average UK price? 200,000? Anyone else? Doubled that, 400,000. What do we reckon? Shout some numbers at me. What do you reckon? 350? What do you reckon? 400? Anyone get it bang on? 278? Anyone get that bang on? Did you think it was lower or higher? Hands up if you thought it was higher. Higher, hands up if you thought it was lower. So a few people thought it was lower, a few people thought it was higher. So as it stands at the moment, it's £278,000 is the average UK house price. We're fortunate enough that we live in the home counties, and actually in the home counties, it's a little bit higher than that as well. So when you are a first-time buyer in the UK, what is the trigger point for the average first-time buyer that actually buys a property? Anyone got any ideas on the age that you think the average first-time buyer might buy a property? Shout some numbers at me. 27? What about over here? Any ideas? 25? What do you reckon on this table? 27 as well? What do you reckon? 23? Okay. So the average age of the first-time buyers in the UK is 32 years old. Surprised? Who thought higher? Who thought higher? No one? Who thought lower? Yeah, most people would have thought lower. I'd imagine the average age in here is about 16, I think. So double your life is everything you've lived so far. And then again, is going to be roughly where that average age is to buy your first property. My job today is to try and reduce that average for this room. So that's the goal of today's presentation, is can we get that into the 20s rather than into the 30s? So how much cash do you need to buy a property at 278? Let me ask you, what do you reckon? How much cash do you think you might need to buy a property for 278,000? The full amount or something else? No idea? What about your friend? No idea? Anyone got any ideas? Pop their hand up. 40,000 for a deposit? Okay, so we're into deposits, that's good. What about over here in the, I don't know, this section? Any ideas? 50K over there? So at the moment, for a first-time buyer, you can actually buy a property with just a 5% deposit. Now, I'll explain exactly what that means, but it means you just need to save, for that average UK house price, £13,900. I know I say just, it sounds like a lot of money. Obviously, it is a lot of money when you're not working, but that's probably as low as it's been for a very long time. And if you went, say, 18 months ago, you would need a 15% deposit to buy a property. So the way that you can buy a property now is much easier than what it was just 18 months ago, where you'd need a whopping 15%. So that's good news for everyone in this room. It means we can get that 32 years old, hopefully much lower. And if you wanted to try and get a slightly better rate on the mortgage, then 10% would probably be my target, because it changes all the time. So we don't know what's going to happen with the banks over the next couple of years. But they're the amount of numbers you would need to own your own property. Not a lot of people buy with totally cash, especially at first-time buyer level. So you don't need to worry about saving the full 278,000, but they're the sort of numbers that you want to have in your head for the amount of money you want to save. So if I just briefly explain how that will work, to buy a property, you basically get some money off the bank. You might find that you get the deposit money off the bank of mum and dad. I know I did for my first property, with a little bit of savings as well, or you might save it yourself. Then you're going to get the mortgage from the bank. So 5% or 10%, or for the purpose of this diagram, it's 35%. Save the 5% or 10%, go to the bank, tell them what you're looking to do in your next chapter in your life, which is buy a property. They will ask you some detailed questions around how much you earn. Are you buying it on your own? Are you buying it with a partner or a friend or a brother or a sister? And then you will get an idea of exactly how much money the bank is prepared to lend you based on the money that you've got in your savings and based on your earnings. At that point, you simply add the two together, and then you go out and find a property within that price range. It sounds fairly simple, and actually it is quite simple. It just means that there's different levels in terms of earnings and savings that people can buy at. So you might not buy in Crowthorne. Maybe you might buy somewhere slightly cheaper at the beginning and then move back to Crowthorne, or you might want to move out of Crowthorne altogether. It's entirely up to you. But that roughly is how the mortgage element of things is done in the UK. Part deposit, normally a small amount, and the rest is finance. And then you'll pay a little bit of an interest on the mortgage that you're borrowing from the bank. For the principle of this diagram, I've just given you a little bit of an idea on exactly what that would cost you monthly. So if you were buying at 278,000, which is the average UK price, the mortgage debt, as it says there, or the mortgage loan, would be just £200 over £250,000. So you would borrow that amount of money from the bank, which sounds like a lot of money. It is, but don't worry, it's not yours, it's the bank's money. You get to live in the property and no one from the bank is living there with you. You'd borrow that over a period of 30 years. So that's your agreement to the bank, is over the next 30 years, I'm going to pay that £250,000 back through my salary and any other extra income that comes in as well. And the rate that the bank is going to charge you is 2.5%. And what's important about that figure is it's the cheapest money you will borrow outside of the bank of mum and dad. If you get a car on finance, if you get a loan directly, if you go on and get some store credit, every bit of interest that you will borrow for all of those will be much, much more than what your mortgage is. And that's the great thing about a mortgage, is it's cheap money. So although you're borrowing it, it is much cheaper money than a lot of the other finance areas. So if you were to do that, you would then be in a position, which you can probably see just around there, that you would be spending £989 a month to live in that property. In this area, if you were going to rent a property at about £280, you probably find it's either going to be a really nice two-bedroom flat, or it's going to be quite a small one-bedroom or two-bedroom house. And the rent for that type of property at the moment is probably about £1,300 to £1,400 a month. So if you were going to be a tenant, it's going to cost you about £300 or £400 a month more. And all you're doing as a tenant when you go to rent a property is you're paying off that landlord's mortgage, and you're not paying anything off for yourself. And you don't even, as a tenant, get it added to your credit rating. So it's not actually financially benefiting you really that much at all. So the better thing to do is not to rush out of home straight away, is to save up a little bit more and try and move out of home straight into a property. The only reason I would say going to rented accommodation is if you just wanted to check the person you're going to buy with is the right person to live with. That would probably be the logical thing to do, so you don't rush into buying with someone straight away. But from a financial point of view, it makes much, much more sense to buy a property because A, it's cheaper, and B, as you can see from this timeline here, the debt that you've acquired from the bank, the mortgage, every year you pay a little bit more of it off until you get down to the 30-year period where it sits at zero. So for the benefit of, or the example that we've used here, at 62 years old, if you were the average UK house price and you're the average UK house price buyer as a first-time buyer, when you're 62, you'll be debt-free, you'll have lived in the property cheaper than renting it, you'll have paid it off over a period of time, and I would imagine that's probably worth £500,000, and you've got that in your bank if you were to ever sell the property. £500,000 cash straight in the bank. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's better than renting. It's a really good way to get on the ladder, and that just gives you a rough idea on how mortgages work. So loan, deposit, pay it off monthly, pay the debt down, eventually you're debt-free, and you've lived in the property and everyone's happy. One of the key things to make sure that happens, and this is quite common for people between 18 and 23. So the second people typically leave school, there's a big problem in the UK that stops people buying a property when they want to buy a property, and that is their credit score. What happens quite a lot is people rush out of school, they've got a job in the first year, get some store cards, maybe get some extra phones on finance, go out and get a loan, can't afford to pay the loan off, or can't afford to pay the store card off, or their phone finance, whatever it may be, start deferring and defaulting on their credit that they've built up. And if you get to the point where it's really bad and you've got CCJ or something like that, then you will not be able to get a mortgage for a very long time. And I see a lot of people that are looking to buy their first property, late 40s, early 50s, and it's taken them that long to pay the finance off, build the credit rating back up to the point where the mortgage and the banks are actually able to trust them that they're going to be the right people with finance. So the reason why I raise that is because you're going into that age bracket where the average person in the UK can sometimes sort of hinder their dreams of buying a property. And also you'll find you'll probably fail on your referencing as a tenant. So effectively you're stuck at home. You can't become a tenant and you can't become a buyer just because in that first 5 years of life after school, people have gone and run away and wrecked their credit rating. One thing that's important to mention on that, so that I don't scare you too much, is a credit score is not just based around not having bad credit, it's based around building credit. So I would never say to someone that's sensible, go out and don't get credit, don't get a loan or a credit card or some finance. By all means, go out and get it. And actually, it's a good thing to get credit, especially when you can afford to pay it, or only when you can afford to pay it, because you're building your credit score up. And actually, a bank won't lend you £250,000 plus 200 quid, as we saw on the previous screen, if you haven't got evidence that you can pay a loan off. So a credit card or a loan or some sort of finance, you need to show the bank that actually you can be trusted to pay that off. If you have zero credit score, it's not bad, it's not good, you won't be able to get the mortgage because there's no evidence that you can pay it off. Hopefully that makes sense. So credit score is really important. You can check those all the time, but actually getting credit is a good idea to do as long as you can afford to borrow it and as long as you can afford to pay it back. That's the real key thing, because that can kill a lot of people's goals and dreams. So that's credit rating. The other element of things that I thought I would touch on is property. You know, it's something where people make a lot of money from, and it's something that generations above me and you have had a fantastic opportunity of buying at a really low rate and using their property to effectively build their financial goals throughout their life. And a lot of people will use property in an investment manner rather than just living in a property as well. And it's a really good thing to do in the UK. It will help people get on the ladder. It keeps things moving. And at the moment, there's a bit of a shortage of property. And when there's a shortage of something, obviously prices go up. And that's what's happening in the property market at the moment, which we can touch on a little bit later. But property makes money. So if you're not just interested in moving out of home and you're not so fussed about that, or buying or becoming a statistic from a first-time buyer, or trying to beat 32 as a sort of average age, but you're interested in making a ton of cash, well, that's where property comes into play as well. So in 2000, January, just after the millennium, the average house price in the UK was £75,000. So that was 22 years ago. that is a £202,000 increase in prices. So 200 grand just since January 2000. There is no reason why in the next 22 years, the same thing doesn't happen. We don't see another increase of 200k. Is there anyone in the room that would love to have 200 grand in their bank? Put your hands up if you would quite happily take 200k today. Most people, if you're not putting your hand up, I'm a bit worried for your financial planning, but hey ho, that's entirely up to you. That's what happened in 2000. Prices went from 75k as an average, and now they're up to, as we saw before, 278,000. Now they haven't just gone straight as a die. There has been a little bit of up and down, or one particular down in that period of time. And then sometimes they go up much quicker and sometimes much slower. In fact, in the last 2 years, they've gone up 20%. 21% in this area. So it's a big, big jump in just 2 years to make a lot of money. And there's an opportunity, and the reason why I mention it is there's an opportunity in the market for the people in this room to think about. That diagram shows the age bracket of the UK. So at the top, people that are 100 years, 95 years, 90, 85, 80, down to where this line comes in, which is 15 to 19-year-olds. Typically, in the UK, if you were looking at it from an economic or a statistic point of view, this would pretty much meant to be a perfect Christmas tree, is what that should look like. It starts, obviously, getting a little bit shorter as people start to pass away, and as more people come into the UK and are born, it should be a Christmas tree. Something's happened in the last couple of generations, which actually means it now looks a little bit more like an acorn. And your age bracket, at the moment, is actually the lowest age bracket of people in population in the UK. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because it means that as your generation starts to look at buying property, you have less competition. So at some point when you start to look at buying property, there is going to be less of you in the same age bracket than what there has been in former generations and will be in the next group of generations. So you do have an opportunity in this room to do the right thing over the next couple of years, save the money, get the good jobs, build your credit rating, and you might be in a position where actually it's slightly easier for you to buy a property than what it has been over the last couple of years or couple of decades even. So if there's one thing that comes away from it about trying to get that 32 years old bracket down, there's an opportunity for everyone in this room to do that. I thought I'd give a little bit of a chat around different types of properties. So different types of properties that are available and what the terminology is when it comes to estate agency chat or property chat. This one's a pretty straightforward one. Property on the left is a detached property and the properties on the right are terrace. So when you're looking at properties, you will always pay that little bit more for a detached home. The detached home obviously means you've got no neighbours either side of you that are actually attached to the property. It's a bit more appealing because it's a bit more private and it will always be a little bit more expensive. It doesn't necessarily mean as a first-time buyer, I would say, go and buy a detached property straight away unless you can afford to. I would say get on the ladder, and maybe the way to get on the ladder is with the terrace property. Again, you can see 3 terraces here. So you've got one on the far right, which is classified as an end terrace. The mid terrace will be slightly cheaper because you've got people either side of you. So if you've got a DJ that lives next door to you, you're going to hear them through the walls potentially, and that's why that might be a little bit less. Or if the guys on the left have got a dog and it's barking all day, you're going to get DJ one side and dog the other side. That will be a little bit less. And then the one on the far left has got a garage attached to it, so you're going to pay a little bit more for the garage. So when you're looking at properties and working out what's going to be best for you, that's the type of thing to start thinking about a little bit, detached versus terrace. And then this is a little bit more complex, and this is where you'll pay differences for these types of properties. So on the left, we've got the freehold property, and on the right, we've got a leasehold property. Anyone in the room know the difference between the two? Anyone want to put their hand up and have a stab at the difference between freehold and leasehold? I'm not expecting anyone to. There we go, we've got someone. That's a really good explanation of how something like Help to Buy works. So you're right on the right track, slightly off with the terminology, but it's a really good explanation of an opportunities there where you could effectively buy part of a property and then the government or a housing scheme owns the other 75% in your example. And then you would still live in the property, but you would only ever own 25% of it rather than the full 100% that you would get from buying it with a mortgage. Leasehold versus freehold is very much based around the fact that this is a house, so you own everything that the property sits on. You own the garden and everything in between on that title, on that plan. This is a block of flats. If I own the top flat, I can't own the land that it sits on because there's another 2, 3 flats below me. So a leasehold will always be a little bit cheaper than a freehold when you look at size versus size. And it's important that you know what a leasehold is when you start buying a property, because a lease has a ticking clock. So if you took a property that's got, for example, 90 years on the lease, that 90 years every year obviously goes down a year. And at the point that it hits about 70 years, it almost becomes unmortgageable. So it would mean that you would have bought a property for 278,000, but you wouldn't be able to sell it for 278,000 because you can't get a mortgage on it anymore at that base. You'd have to pay extra money to the person that owns the whole freehold to top it back up to 90 or 100 years. So it's an extra expense at some point if you live there that you don't really want to have to do, which is the difference between your freehold and your leasehold. So freehold, you own everything in the title. Leasehold, you own the flat in the middle, but everyone shares that leasehold and someone owns the freehold, which is the whole building and the land that it sits on. So you're not a tenant, but you're almost a tenant within the block. So the difference between the two means you will always find it's a little bit cheaper to own the leasehold, but it does mean there's an opportunity to get a bigger property for a cheaper figure. So it's a good place to start getting on the ladder. And it's also quite a good place if you're looking to invest in property and rent it out and not actually live there yourself, because you'll find you'll get bigger rent for the less cost. So that's freehold versus leasehold. Does anyone have any questions at all for me before maybe I'll give you a little bit of an update on the property market at the moment? Any questions? Anyone confused? Yeah, hit me.
So they did some stuff around university, and I think they might have mentioned money, because I had a few students come up to me worried about like student finance and the debt. So maybe a bit of reassurance of how that kind of affects them getting a mortgage, or how it doesn't affect them.
Yep. So if you got a student loan because you've gone to uni, and with your student loan, you've gone through uni, you've got your degree, you've got a really good job. When you then spend a year, 2 years, potentially 3, 4, however many years it takes, on your pay slip, you will obviously be paying off your student loan. So when you come to get a mortgage, what the bank will do is they'll look at, let's say you earn £30,000 a year and you've got X amount of student finance, it will just subtract the amount that you pay annually from the amount you earn annually. So if you're paying off £2,000 worth of student loan every single year, then the bank will calculate it on the £28,000 that's a net figure effectively. And that also applies for car finance, phone finance, any type of finance you've got. So if you've got 5, 6 grand's worth of finance and you earn 30k a year, the bank will actually drop it down to, let's say, £25,000. And that £25,000 on average, they normally times it by 4. So if you earn 25 grand a year net, you'll be able to get 100 grand's worth of mortgage finance as a rough sum. There are some that if you do it as a partnership, they might do it as 5 times income. So, you know, if you earn 25 and partner earns 25, times it by 5, and that's the amount of money that you could potentially get from a mortgage point of view. So you can get quite a big chunk of finance. But yeah, if it's going to benefit you to go to university, to get the student loan, to get the degree, to get the better job, to save faster, to earn more money, to get a bigger amount of finance from the bank, and to get a bigger property that you're happier in, then obviously it makes sense to do so. Any other questions? Anyone confused on any of that? Or does that all make good sense to people? Yeah? To buy a property at the moment, good question. To buy a property at the moment, it probably takes about 4 months for the legals to go through. So if you found a property this weekend and you were ready financially to commit to it, it takes about 4 months at the moment for the legals to go through. Used to be able to do it in about 2.5 months, but everything in the world is a little bit slower at the moment than what it has been before. So legally, you can get it through that quickly. You don't have to pay it off over 30 years, as I did as the sort of diagram on there. You could pay the mortgage off faster if you wanted to own it outright quicker. Or I think you can actually go to about 35 years now as well. So you can pay it off slower and obviously pay less money monthly. So yeah, great question. Any other questions at all? Yep. Yeah, great question. Exactly as you said it at the beginning. If you're doing it as a buy-to-let, typically you need to put down 25%. So 25% cash, 75% mortgage. That will give the bank confidence that there's enough money in there and you're not living in the property, that it's going to be taken care of and it's going to be paid. There's also a case that if the mortgage is, say, £1,000 a month, the bank will want to make sure that the rent covers that. So it won't actually take your income, it will take how popular that area is, that property is, to demand a rent of, say, £1,400. So it's what's called a stress test. And it will make sure that the rent will definitely pay off the mortgage as well. So yeah, really good question from buy-to-let perspective. Any other questions over here at all? No, good stuff. So what has the property market done, if I've got time, briefly on that? Yeah, so property market since COVID, because it's been very different over the last 2 years. And if anything, if you talk to an estate agent or anyone in property or parents that own a property, they will tell you the market's gone absolutely bonkers since COVID. As I mentioned, prices in this area have gone up by about 21%. At the moment, there's a massive shortage of properties being built. And at the moment, new build wise, on record this year, there will be less properties built than what there was all the way back since 2012. And we're meant to be building more as a population, we're actually building less. So although there's the cost of living crisis and there's the feed or fuel kind of scenario going on, from a property market point of view, if you're putting your money into property, it's probably one of the safest places you can put it at the moment, because we've got a demand and supply issue when it comes to living and buyer demands. It's also one of the cheapest times at the moment to get that finance. That 2.5% example I used earlier, there has been rates up as high as 10, 15% on interest rates. So it's really cheap to buy from a finance point of view, and deposit-wise, as I mentioned, you could buy as little as 5% deposit at the moment. So there's not enough houses being built. There's loads of people looking to buy property, and as a result, we're seeing prices go up and up and up at the moment. And the same accounts for rental as well. There's loads of tenants looking, not a lot of properties available to rent. So the sooner you can get on the ladder, the quicker you start making more money, the cheaper it will be for you. And I keep saying to all of my clients, today is the cheapest day that you can buy property. Which I truly believe is definitely the case at the moment. So that's pretty much it from me.